one of the things I want to do is first thank you so much for coming. It's so meaningful to an author because you write a book, you speak about a book, you love speaking about the book because you're glad it's the written word and not you anymore. So one of the things I really like to do is, again, be very grateful to the library system. I've spoken in several libraries several times, as well as some bookstores. When I am either at a bookstore or library or anywhere where I'm really looking at the book before I'm purchasing it, is I look at what is on the front cover. And I say, because now I have to pick front covers, and I say, you know, why did they pick these things? Why did they pick what's on the cover? And so I'm going to take the one that doesn't have awards, because I'm very fortunate. It's won awards. But I'm going to show you on this. If you look at the name of the book is The Alchemy of Love and Marriage. And alchemy, and I'll be sort of quick about this, alchemy is originally the predecessor of chemistry. But it was at a time where magic was a little bit part of it. And so in alchemy, it's two elements. Just like in a relationship or partnership or marriage, you have two people. Well, the two elements, for example, let's take copper and tin. Copper's great, it's important, you need it in certain respects, and tin serves a different purpose and you need it. But when you meld them together with fire, they form bronze, which is stronger than both of them. And that's what happens in a relationship. You're strong, your partner's strong, you've got great qualities, you bring them together. I believe you have almost a third entity, the marriage itself. And it's hard. Marriage is and relationships are hard, they're work, they take a lot of effort. Obviously, I wrote a book on it, I think it's worth it. So that's about alchemy. When it comes where you see the heart with what looks like cracks, because in life there's always cracks along the road. There's bumps along the road, there's cracks. And what happens is you can take a plate and it falls. And it falls on the floor and it breaks into a million pieces. And you say, well, you know, I don't really need this plate. I don't want to sit and put it all together. I'm just going to throw it in the trash. Okay. Or you say, you know, it doesn't look right, but I could use the plate, so I'm going to Home Depot and I'm going to get some kind of a resin or a glue. Or what the Japanese said in the 15th century was, we're going to take whatever resin they use to put something together, and we're going to flow liquid gold in it. And they attempted that. And when they did the liquid gold, and they put the plate back together, it's really a metaphor. So you have a relationship, you have those three choices, but if you choose what I call the work, I look at the gold as being the hard work, that sometimes, not always, you can put it back together and it looks even more beautiful. So when I show this to people, when I was first showing the book, talking about the book, they went, oh, that's really beautiful. I even like it better than the white heart as it was. And I go, yeah, because just like in life, you have imperfections, you have a history. And if you look at a relationship as filled with some cracks, filled with some imperfections, but maybe we can fix this. And that's the main story behind this. So I believe that marriage or a long relationship or partnership has actually three parts. What I call the early years, the middle years, and the later years. And so when you write a book that's about relationships, it's a bit heavy. So what I do in my writing, in this book especially, is I refer to fairy tales. Because people go, oh, okay, I like fairy tales, and they just keep reading, and they don't realize there's a metaphor for that. And if you look at alchemy itself, And this is called kintsugi, because if I say, well, what's kintsugi? Most people say, I don't know what it is. And then when I explain it, they know very well what it is. So what I do in that both put broken pieces together is I use fairy tales. The phrase once upon a time usually introduces a fairy tale. This book is not a fairy tale, but it is a tale. And by that I mean a story. It tells of two people who met, were enchanted by that chemistry of youth, and after 4 years of dating, married. Together they grew as a couple, moving from passion to friendship and trust. They had children and lived a life that seemed to develop in a rather traditional way. Their children became adults, found partners, they got married, and they had their families. And then one day, the children moved away, had their own families. So the two are just two again. And they were still passionate, and they would love their work, and now they had some time to travel, they had some peace and quiet, they even had some disposable income. Just looked like life was good. And then it was not. It was not illness that threatened their relationship or anyone think they could pinpoint. It was the dark outside storm that hits like a tornado, life itself. The characters in fairy tales tend to end up stronger and than they began. And they have surmounted whatever spells or magic or simple misguided decisions they experienced along the way. And what I do is I talk about the early years of a marriage, that first third, or a relationship. And when I speak about the early years, I recognize that there are going to be some little cracks. Bad things happen along the way, but they stay sort of small. And I have used the metaphor of Hansel and Gretel to convey not only our youth and inexperience, I mean my husband's and mine, but also the ability to clasp hands as we entered the unknown and work together to survive. If you recall in the fairy tale, it is Hansel who comes up with the idea of scattering pebbles. And he puts pebbles out so when they walk into the woods, they can find their way back out. And he says, be comforted, dear little sister. And this is just what Howard would say to me sometimes in order to trust the plan he had created. But when on the second attempt that they went into the woods, and they went to create a pathway back home, they scattered breadcrumbs. Whether they were too tired to pick up pebbles, whether there were no pebbles left, but they scattered breadcrumbs, which the birds ate. And they survive, even though they're stuck in the woods, the dark woods, they can't get out. And they still have each other. Howard and I had a few failures along the way as well, but we found our strength by sticking together. Ultimately, Hansel and Gretel encounter an evil witch. They're in the forest, which is actually in the middle of a relationship. And the evil witch lures them into a cottage made of delicious treats. There's ice cream, it's magical. There's cookies, there's candy, and she finds that what she can do is she can get Hansel to come in, and then she imprisons him. And she imprisons him in a stable. Well, what's Gretel going to do? She has to develop a new plan. And she figures out a way to distract the witch and free her brother so they can vanquish their enemy forever. Within this magical environment of the tale, Hansel and Gretel transform from fearful children into confident, competent people, taking turns in the forefront, working together, and they move from darkness into the light, enslavement into freedom. They survive because the entity they create together are greater and stronger than the parts of them separately. They create a third entity, and that is the agent of their triumph. So that's really what happens in the beginning of a marriage or a relationship. Things are pretty good. then as the same as when they walked into the woods and they couldn't get out. That's what I call the middle years of a relationship. And how does that translate? In the middle years, and in Hansel and Gretel, they meet the witch and they're trapped. Well, in the middle years, you start frequently to encounter the stressors of life. And there are stressors that we all go into that we're really not quite prepared for. We know about them, but we're really not prepared. So, for example, there are stresses such as you say, okay, I've rented for many years, or I live in a condo, and I want to buy something. And you check with the bank and you can afford the mortgage and you can afford your payments and you've got a down payment or whatever the system is at that time. And you do it. And you move in and the windows leak or the pipes break or the roof needs to be redone. Things you never anticipated, but you could make the mortgage. So here come these little stressors. At that time, frequently, someone decides it's time to have a baby. Well, now you got a nucleus of 3 or 4 or more. And this nucleus, because the baby has to get larger, but you still have bills to pay and jobs to do, etc. So you say to yourself, oh, nobody told me this baby is work 24/7, or nobody told me this baby costs a lot of money. Nobody tells you that. Also, what happens is, in those middle years, maybe you don't have babies, maybe you had them a little earlier, and now you have teenagers. Anyone who has ever raised a teenager, I don't have to tell you what the stresses are. They just come with each one differently, but they're there. And what happens is, not only are these stresses from within your new nucleus, but the stressors are also outside stressors. For example, somebody loses their job. Somebody has to leave the area because of their job. Or you're really good at your job and you want to get better and you just put so much effort into it, but it's stress every day. Okay, that's work stress. Bad enough. But then you have what sociologists call the second shift. What's the second shift? She works, he works, they work, and they come home, and we worked all day, and everybody's doing the right thing, by the way. Nobody's doing anything bad. Everybody's trying, but you're busy. And now you come home for your second shift. And the second shift means you have to get dinner, or you have to help with homework, or you have to go to a game, or you have to go to an activity. And to be honest with you, there are a lot of activities in suburbia. I grew up in a city. I don't understand all these activities, but there's a lot of them. So you want to go there and you want to make this. So you've got this second shift, which is like another job. And you're busy. And you're busy. And all of a sudden, in the two of you, without realizing it, anything that was a crack gets larger. Because you're just busy. And you actually start to separate without separating. You think you're working together, but you're losing that love. And it's very, very, very hard. Very hard. So, along with that, you're just like sinking slowly. The marriage is sinking slowly. And I will tell you a comical personal story that in my marriage, which the early years lovely, middle years stress. When my daughter was in her preteen years, and I had a son 2 years younger, when they were in those years, we started to argue. And we had not been big fighters. We just didn't fight, you know. But in those years, we started arguing and fighting and loud. So one time there were 2 days where we argued straight, which we didn't even know what to do with, but we argued. And at night, my children went upstairs to their rooms, and we went to our bedroom. At about 2 a.m., I hear something with somebody in the kitchen. So I go into the kitchen, and I don't know how many of you remember or know what the pink Pepto-Bismol is. I go into that kitchen, and standing over the sink is my preteen daughter swigging the Pepto-Bismol as she's standing there. She's swigging it. And I go, excuse, what's going on? And with that, the tears come down. And the tears come down, and she starts to say, I don't know what's going on, but I can't stand the fighting. You and Daddy never fight. You're fighting all the time, and I can't stand it, and I can't sleep, and I have a bad stomach. And I go, whoa, this stops now. I said, I give you my word, in the morning, we won't have any more fights. And for those of you who have raised children or are raising them, they hear you, and you think they believe what you're saying. But if you really look in their eyes, you know they don't believe anything you're telling them. They're just listening because they have to. And so I looked at my daughter and I said, okay, and it was just so weird because of the Pepto-Bismol. I have a mirror next to my kitchen. So I said, do me a favor, turn around and look in the mirror. And what is in the mirror? It's a thick pink mustache. In between her upper lip and her nose is this thing. And she looks at the mustache and starts to giggle. And once she started to giggle, I go, okay, I got you. You know, you're laughing. So I said, let's wipe it off, and I promise you it will be different in the morning. So she was calm. I walked her upstairs. I go into the bedroom. My husband now is, what's going on? And I said, just what I told you, verbatim. And he looks at me and goes, oh, that's not good. I said, yeah, that's not good. It's not helpful. So we really calmed everything down, but we couldn't fix anything. We were both trying. Cracks. So it didn't work. We just kept working, and like I said, if anyone was doing anything wrong, I understand putting a label on it, but nobody was. It was just busy, busy, busy. So this went on for a while, and this is Arlene Sacks, this isn't written anywhere other than in my first book, but I believe you look at love this way. There's loving somebody. Like, I love the people who were so kind to me, and I wrote a book about it when I became a widow. I love those people. There's never enough I can do for those people. I love them. And I love my husband. I will always love my husband. But then there's something called adoring somebody. And I adored my husband, maybe not every day, but I adored him. So I loved him, I adored him. But then there's being in love. And that was gone. It wasn't in here, it wasn't in the house, it wasn't anything. There was in love, not. And this went on for maybe a couple of weeks. And finally, I just looked at him one night, and it wasn't good. And that was a house that we worked really hard to get, really hard to keep, really hard to be in. Loved that house. And I just looked at him and I said, you have to leave. And he just looked at me. We had been together since before we were 17 years old. So he just looked at me. He said, what do you mean I have to leave? And I told him basically what I said to you. I said, there's no love in this house. I don't want to be with you in this house. And you're not happy either. You don't want to be with me. And he just looked at me. And so for about 5 nights, he slept in the guest room, and I slept in my bedroom. I always got up earlier, went to work earlier, came home earlier, so I would get something to eat and go right to the bedroom. This went on for about 5-ish evenings. Saturday evening, he finds me and he says, I understand what you're saying. I know I have to leave. You're right. I'm not happy. But could we at least go for a meal so we could discuss it? Now, the children were already in college-ish, right at that time. And he said, could we at least go have a meal? Because I have to talk to you about this. And we went out of the area that we lived in. Actually, we live here in Kendall, and we went to Miami Beach, which, you know, going from one end of the city to another, it's like you're going to another state. So we go to Miami Beach, and we go to this little French bistro, and it's quiet, and I look at him, I said, you asked for this, so you have to speak. Tell me why I'm here. And he said to me, I understand, you're absolutely right, but I don't know how to do this. You have to help me. And I said, wait a second, you want me to help you leave me? I don't understand. I had no idea what to do, none. But I love my husband, and I knew I was done with the marriage. I was positive. And he just looked at me and said, you have to help me. I'll do it, but you got to tell me what to do. I don't know what to do. So I said, okay, now mind you, I have no idea what I'm saying. I'm going real slow with my food because I'm making this stuff up as I go along. I have no idea. One of the things I did know, though, was that my husband and I could always talk. We could always have a conversation because we started so young, and there were no other people along the way. So we always could have a conversation. Obviously, we were done. He knew, I knew, we knew. So I make this up, I'm telling you as I'm sitting there. And I said, okay. He says, just tell me how we're going to do this, and I'll do it. And I said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go out every morning, because I was an early riser. And at 6:30 in the morning, we're going to go to a park bench. And he looks at me. I said, we'll either go to a park bench or a bench outside of Cafe Con Leche. Because I'm a big, you know, I live in Miami. I drink Cafe Con Leche as much as I can. It's the best. So I said, and we're going to sit and we're going to have a conversation. And I'm going to talk first. And I'm going to tell you all the things you did that changed everything. And then it will be your turn to either decide, I don't want to be bothered with this, and bye-bye, or you're going to tell me. But that's going to be our plan. I may have not known what I was saying, but he knew even less. So together, you know, you're like, you know, so non-knowledgeable. So we did. We went and we sat on a bench, and I explained to him, I said, look what's happened. You're not only losing me, you're losing your children. Me, his children, and your office, the people who work in your office. Didn't you notice your colleagues have nothing to do with you? It's like a three-ring circus, because I write about a three-ring circus in my book. When you go to the circus, you may be looking at all three rings, and it's like crazy, but you say to yourself, there must be some method. There's a ringmaster. They know what they're doing with the three rings. You just don't know it. And that's what his life had become. It was three rings, three important rings. Colleagues, children, me. I said, and this all is about you becoming selfish. And he looked at me and he said, I don't understand. I said, well, that's why I'm going to speak first. I'm going to explain what you did. And it took about, honestly, I spoke, then he spoke, and one day he said something very interesting to me. He said, you know, I'm sitting here listening to you. I believe you, and I trust you. But how do I know this is true, what you're telling me about the children? Maybe you're just using this as a way. I said, you know, you're right. I could be making this up and lying. Here's my phone. Call your child. Call either one. I've never told them that we're going through this. They don't live here anymore. They're in college. Call them. So he calls my daughter, and it's my phone. So my daughter picks up the phone and goes, hi, Mom. And he goes, no, it's Dad. And they sit, and he says, I want to tell you, I'm having a conversation with Mom. She goes, oh. And he says, yes. And I want to ask you something. Did I behave badly when you were growing up to any of you? And my daughter said, I love you, and I am not going there. I am not answering you. I don't want to get in trouble. This is a college kid who's afraid she's going to get in trouble. She said, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to say anything. So he said, no, and this went on 3 times. Finally, after the 3rd time, he said, you will get in trouble if you don't answer me. I've had enough of this, I'm afraid. So she said, I love you, Daddy. You were a great dad. You gave us everything. But you acted like an asshole. And he sat there and he said, thank you, I appreciate it. He put the lid on his coffee, put the coffee down, and said to me, I cannot stay here, I cannot speak, we have to go. And that was the moment. That was the moment he decided to change. Now, mind you, I don't want you to think I was an angel in this. I was not, because I saw things were not good, and I let them go. And that to me is like indifference. And you may hate people, you may, but when you're indifferent and you don't care, that's really bad. Really bad. So he really figured out a way. In these middle years, it was the later middle years, he figured out a way to work with his colleagues. He asked them, what did I do because see, he signed the paycheck. So they weren't going to say anything. All they did was they moved backwards and they let him drown. I had moved backwards. I wasn't a wife anymore. And the children, they were going to go. So he took the 3, starting with me, and he's actually asked them, he said, I realize this, just like you had to grow up, I have to grow. And he worked with each one. And poor guy, he asked them what they wanted to do, and my daughter wanted to go to this very heavy metal rock concert, and I'm sure he came home losing many decibels in his ears. I'm sure that's true. And with my son wanted to go sleep on the ice in Minnesota with Outward Bound. So he did all that, and he worked with his colleagues in the office, and there's some funny stories in there. But it's the middle years where those stressors come. And what we decided to do was try to get him better and try to get me better. And we didn't realize that by both of us getting better, we were coming back on the path, but not quite there. But I was walking in my house one day, and that's part of the essence of this book, that I believe that marriage is its own entity. And many of you may not, and some people don't belong in a relationship, don't belong being married. That's a different story, not mine. So as I was walking across my house, the steps that go up, all of a sudden I sat down on the steps and I said, oh boy, this marriage has a life of its own. It's stronger than both of us. And that's when I knew. I went right to the phone, I called him up, I said, come home now. And so we did all the work, all the gold is the work, and we accept the imperfections, and we accept the history, and we accept, but I will tell you that if you are fortunate enough to have 2 human beings who are willing to do this, the next 20 years were great. So we did all these silly things. We started to travel little bits together. We put everything back so that the end was great. And I will tell you something that I will share, because obviously you now know I am a widow. And I write an epilogue. It's 2 pages. And it's called The Hope Chest, because I'd like to end on that. As an avid reader, who fell under the spell of Old English and French romance novels as a girl, I was fascinated by the notion of a hope chest in those stories. For those of you who have never heard of such a thing, because they're a bit out of style, a hope chest is an actual wooden chest given to a girl of marriageable age in which she can store her trousseau, many years ago. In that trousseau were beddings, clothing, other items. There was no Amazon, there was no registering, the old days. And for many young women of my generation, having a hope chest was just part of having hope. During the first 3 years Howard and I dated, we collected all kinds of memorabilia and souvenirs, from ticket stubs and playbills to restaurant menus and cocktail napkins. After 4 years, we got engaged, and I told him I wanted a hope chest. Instead of purchasing something already made, we found a wood craftsman in New York's East Village, which was in those days a very bohemian enclave full of artists and artisans. We ended up ordering a medium-sized chest made of pine, the least expensive. It was ready, and I eagerly brought it home to Queens. The reason I bring this up is that I want to end by telling you about the very first thing I put in my hope chest. While in college, Howard and I liked to take leisurely car rides to poke around in small towns. This is something we would continue to do throughout our life together. On one of these jaunts, we stopped for a light lunch in a Long Island hamlet and strolled along its main street afterward. In the window of a little boutique, I noticed a lovely pale green cotton skirt. The price tag was all too visible and read either $12 or $18. Whichever it was considerably more than my $7 allowance. We walked on. The next week, when Howard picked me up for a date, he was carrying a flat white box tied with a shiny white ribbon. I am sure you know what was in that box. Later that night, I placed the first item in my hope chest, not the pretty green skirt, which went into my closet and was worn on many occasions over years, but the flat white box with the shiny white ribbon. To this day, those items are still at the bottom of my chest, covered by layer upon layer of keepsakes that represent a lifetime of adventure, fun, and love. At the top lies a death certificate, representing the end of our life together. Between the flat white box and the death certificate, that is our marriage. If you were to look at it, you would see a pile of papers and trinkets. What I see, pure gold. And the last thing I'll read you is a line, it's a quote. Your life at this exact moment is a direct result of choices you made once upon a time.